I wanted to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Alt21, the foreign exchange and hedging platform that saves you time and money on cross-border transactions. A previous guest, Dan Gardner, spoke about forecasting and risk. One of his central points was, as he put it, the things we're doing now are so incredibly complex, to see even a little bit into the future takes an enormous amount of struggle, and even then we're going to make mistakes. As CEO of Nurole, predicting just 12 months out is hard. As we expand, variables and risks multiply. Anything I can do to take risk off the table is helpful. In the past, I've been blind to the risk of FX exposure in our budgeting. A small movement could eat into our investment budget and compromise our credibility when our forecasts are wrong. If you want to remove risk from your foreign exchanges without breaking the bank, head to alt21.com. That's alt21.com to find out more. Hello and welcome to Enter the Boardroom with Nurole, the podcast exploring what makes great boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Nurole, the board search specialist and market leader bringing science to the art of board hiring. Today's guest, Baroness Dido Harding, is member of the House of Lords, senior steward at the Jockey Club and former chair of NHS Improvement. She was a non-executive director on the Court of the Bank of England and chair of the bank's Remuneration Committee. Dido was chief executive of TalkTalk Telecom Group plc from 2010 to May 2017. She also served on the boards of the British Land Company plc and held governance roles at Cheltenham Racecourse through the Jockey Club. She was a trustee of Everyone and is a non-executive director of the UK Holocaust Memorial Foundation. Dido, a huge welcome and thank you for being here.
It's lovely to be here.
You started the role in 2010. And then in 2011, the company got fined by Ofcom for billing customers incorrectly and failing to correct the mistake quickly enough. I imagine that must have been a really frustrating experience because you just come into this absolute hellhole. You're trying to fix it all as quickly as possible, and then the regulator comes and gives you a sort of kick while you're down. What were your lessons from that you think board members listening can take something from?
You may think I'm mad, but it was helpful that Ofcom did that. Ofcom put us firmly on the naughty step. And I remember inviting Ed Richards, who was the chief exec of Ofcom at the time, to come and brief the sort of senior management and the boards on why they'd done that and what they needed from us. And he and I had talked about it in advance, that actually what he was doing was trying to help us. So at the time, TalkTalk accounted for one of the metrics that Ofcom has used really quite successfully over the last 20 years to improve customer service in telecoms, has been publishing the number of complaints by brand, that they still do it quarterly. They're afraid they invented that for us, because at the time, we accounted for more complaints to Ofcom than the whole of the rest of the telco sector put together. And the business was finding it hard to come to terms with that. Note that they'd been hugely successful. They'd massively disrupted the market. They'd brought a product that they knew was better value than anyone else was delivering, but the service was dreadful. So actually, I used, Ofcom, I didn't feel personally that it was a black mark for me. Ofcom were assessing and I think that's one of the important lessons for a chief executive. You self-identify with the business, of course you do, but you've got to be able to stand back and say, if somebody is challenging and criticising the business, are they right? And if they're right, how do I move to a position to help the business hear that and change? So Ofcom was right, that we did need to double down massively on our service improvements. And the day that we weren't the most complained about telco, we celebrated hugely. It was a really powerful means of driving positive change for the organisation. So I think one of the challenges for board members is that you need your board members to be truly independent. One of the best pieces of advice I was given it by John Gardner, who was the chairman at Tesco, when I got my first non-executive position and I was buying food for Tesco. And John said to me, go into every board meeting as an NED with your resignation letter in your back pocket. And what he meant was go into every board meeting feeling free to say what you think is right. It doesn't matter for your personal reputation if the business that you're a board member of is in trouble or makes a mistake. It only matters if you've not done your job, which is to speak truth to power. to try and help the leadership of the business make the right decision. So if you've mentally got your resignation letter in your back pocket, you're not going to feel encumbered. You're not employed. You're an independent non-exec. So your job is to just do what you think is right always. And I think sometimes when a business goes through stress, it's hard for non-execs to do that because they feel personally responsible if things are going wrong. But actually, what you want as a chief exec is you want your board to be a bit dispassionate and able to see if that incoming criticism is right. And actually, when I look back, I didn't get any pushback from my board at all about that. The opposite. I got a very wise advice and support on how to build and deepen the relationship with the regulator and double down on the improvements we knew we needed to make. Had one particularly wise board director who came out with me and the team to the call centres in India and the Philippines to help us bring our third-party contractors, our call centre operators with us on that journey. And so a board that wasn't defensive and wasn't scared of that, but was able to harness it, that was invaluable.
And can you pick any specific examples of things they did that you found particularly useful, apart from coming with you, obviously, on the trip?
So it's the coming with, it's the sharing experience in other businesses, knowing that you're not alone, because usually these problems have been experienced somewhere else. And I was thinking about how to describe this morning. I used to say as a chief executive, but I think it's true of the board as well, that really you only have one lever that you can pull, which is to hurry up or slow down. And often your job as the board is to be counter-cyclical to the business. So if you've got a really hard-driving, determined, committed, open management team that's doing their absolute best to solve whatever the problem is that they're facing, often the job of the board is to say, well done, and to calm them down. And to be the opposite of that management drive. The worst thing you can do when you've got a really, really hard-driving, paranoid management team is to say, why aren't you going faster? Or I'm a bit worried about this, because they're going to over-rotate. And the opposite is true, of course, as well. Every management team has got blind spots. And so often your job on the board is to be the counter. I know you think you're getting this right, but I've seen X, Y, and Z elsewhere. So we were very paranoid about our service. What we needed was the wisdom of our board director who went out to the call centres with us, sat with the agents, sat with the middle managers in the call centres, sat with the owners of the call centres, and gave us all confidence that actually what we were doing inch by inch by inch was going to make things better. And shared specific examples. Have you tried doing this way? Have you tried it doing? Have you talked to someone and said, go and talk to this company? Very practical, very hands-on coaching, but not done in I'm really worried about this. Done in you can do this. You're doing the right things. I believe in you, because that's where we were at that time.
That's a wonderfully simple but powerful heuristic of faster or slower. Where is the executive team and how do we counterbalance that as a board? So in 2015, you suffered a major cyber attack. And I'm really interested to hear what the lessons that you took from that experience that inform how you think about cybersecurity as a board member today.
Well, firstly, I love the fact that you've just missed the growth story in TalkTalk, the doubling of the share price, the launching of TV, the improvement. Anyway, let's cut that. We got some stuff.
We'll come back to that.
Stuff, right? But no, really happy to talk about my experience of cyber. I mean, interestingly, I was at an event this week where Archie Norman, chairman of M&S, was talking about what M&S had been experiencing. And obviously that was a Chatham House event, so I'm not going to describe what he said, except to say that I almost got sort of PTSD because it felt like I was straight back to where I was a decade ago. The themes were exactly the same. And the reaction from people there who hadn't experienced a cyber attack was exactly the same as it was when I used to talk 10 years ago about it. And I think there's something about cyber that sends a shiver down the spine of all CEOs and board members, and still does. And I think some of the reason it does is when you get attacked by a physical criminal, you can see them. You know who's attacking you. even in modern warfare, you've got a pretty good idea who's flying the drones at you. And you know what the issue is that you're facing. The thing that makes a cyber attack utterly terrifying in the moment is that you really don't know whether you're being attacked by a nation state or a teenager in the bedroom. By the way, it's also not obvious that it matters which it is. You don't know whether it's going to become physical. So the most personally terrifying 3 hours of my life have been when I asked the then number 2 at GCHQ, should I be worried that the people who are trying to blackmail us will get physical, and should I be worried whether they threaten my family? This was 36 hours into the cyber attack. And the answer wasn't, don't be ridiculous, Dido, you're getting carried away and imagining you're in an episode of Spooks. The answer was, I don't know. Give me a bit of time and I will go away and find out, and I will call you back this evening. That period of time waiting, when I'd had a very, very senior member of the security services tell me that my greatest fear that my family might be threatened, is something he can't be sure about. And when he came back and said, I don't think it's going to get physical, but I do think you need to have personal security for a couple of days, that wasn't very much fun. And so the problem with cyber is you don't know who's attacking you. You don't know where they've gone in your systems. You don't know what information they've got. And you feel very, very powerless. And even today, where every organisation, cybersecurity, contingency planning, is so much better than it was 10 years ago, you can be absolutely certain that your game plan will not survive contact with a crisis for more than an hour or so. And so you're into all of the problems of crisis leadership, which clearly I've done quite a lot of in my career, but with this ephemeral, hard to get hold of foe, where at the same time, and it was particularly true of me, it is less true now. You know, TalkTalk was one of the very first big companies to go public about experiencing a cyber attack. And that scared everybody in the public realm as well. So just as a shiver runs down the board spine, a shiver runs down each of our own spines when a brand tells us that they might have lost our data, even though we now know that our data's probably out there anyway. So it's a highly emotive thing. And yeah, well, you should probably ask me some more specific questions. Otherwise, I'll just keep waffling about it. But I think the most important thing I've learned is that when a board or a chief executive tells me that they are in a good position in terms of their cyber planning, I immediately worry. That is my immediate flag. So when I went into the NHS, a lot of NHS trusts would say to me, yeah, no, we've had the WannaCry problem. We've understood it. We've got a really good cyber security program, and that's okay. They're the trusts that I thought you were definitely not okay. Because the cyber criminals are getting ever more sophisticated. These are really, really sophisticated business operations. We should have no illusions. And so your cyber defenses have got to keep growing and growing and growing. And so the board and the business that says, yeah, we're really worried about cyber, and we're constantly trying to think about what's the bleeding edge risk in cyber. And are we creating an environment where our teams can be honest about their concerns about our legacy tech stack? And what risk are we actually willing to take? Because the only way you can remain completely safe from a cyber attack is to turn off your digital footprint, which will basically kill your business. So you've got to be willing to take some cyber risk. So you've got to move beyond that shiver down the spine that says, I don't really want to engage in this, to say, let's have a proper conversation about what risk we're willing to accept and what risks we've currently got that we need to mitigate. And the board that talks like that about cyber, well, they're in a better place. They're probably still going to get attacked, but they're in a much better place to deal with it when they are.
Well, it must have been an incredibly stressful situation, and in preparation for this, I watched lots of the interviews you gave, and what I saw, I thought you handled the questions, and I think a lot of them were very unreasonable from the media, sort of completely unrealistic expectations from people who've clearly never run an organisation of any scale whatsoever. But I'm curious, if you're on the board of an organisation who finds themselves in a similar position in the public eye, what's your counsel as a board member to the CEO? What do you wish you'd known before you went through that experience that you know now?
The first thing is preparation does make a difference. So having said that, whatever plan you've got won't survive contact with the crisis for more than an hour or two, the more you have thought through the stuff that is consistent in any crisis, the more brain space, more cognitive load you free up to enable the management team to solve for the specifics of this crisis. So, it probably covers no surprise that TalkTalk wasn't particularly good at doing the sort of disaster recovery crisis planning. We were a very entrepreneurial business. We were really good at the immediate mobilization and adaptation, but we didn't have the sort of checklists that you could immediately produce. So one of my learnings is that's really worth having, not because you're going to follow them, but because they act as a starter that takes some of the cognitive load away from the management team so they can focus on problem solving in the now. The other thing I always say and it happens a bit less now because it's a long time ago, I'm out of date, but for a long time afterwards, I used to get chief execs call me that I didn't know very well. And I'd leaving a message sounding very stressed, saying, could you give me a call back? I think you might be able to help me. And I go, oh, that's a cyber attack. And I always used to say to them, work out what your objective is. What is your objective in this? What is your purpose? Who are you or what are you there to try and protect and defend? For most consumer businesses, the answer is you're there to look after your customers. If you can work out what your objective function is, you then also realise that that's not the same as everyone else's. So in my case, the National Cybersecurity Centre didn't even exist at that stage. So I was dealing direct with GCHQ, and GCHQ's objective is national security. So they wanted to make sure it wasn't a state actor and it wasn't going to spread. They didn't actually, and it's not, I'm being a bit unkind, but they didn't really care what happened to my customers' data, because that wasn't a national security incident. Didn't really care about them. The Metropolitan Police, who immediately arrived to sort of try and catch the crooks, their objective was to catch the crooks. They didn't care about protecting my customers' data really, but they were there. They were there to help, but to help try and find the bad guy. And so the thing we realised within about 24 hours is that we were the only people whose objective was to try and look after our customers. So it took us 24 hours to get there. I think that if we'd realised that really clearly the first moment, we would have acted strangely. We would have gone public earlier, because the thing we discovered and worked out was that we could warn our customers that there was a risk that our customers' data had been stolen, our customers' bank account details had been stolen, and actually the biggest risk that came from that is that someone would pretend to be TalkTalk and scam our customers into giving them more access or more money. And for particularly our elderly or vulnerable customers, the real risk was that they became a much bigger target for a scam. And the way that we protected them was that we went out and publicly said, this has happened and we're trying to look after you by telling you. In fact, what happened was it took us until 9:30 at night on day 2 to work out that that's what we had to do. And we had a board call where the Metropolitan Police on the board call told the board that that's not what we should do, because the Met wanted to catch the bad guys and they wanted 2 or 3 days to try and track using our systems where the bad guys were. And they thought they had a better chance of catching the bad guys if we didn't go public for a few days. And I remember one of my board members asking, is there a world where we won't have to tell our customers that this has happened? And the Met's answer was, oh no, you're definitely going to have to tell them. And it was that moment where the board, all of us realised, well, we'd better tell them now then. Because how do we explain if we tell them in 4 days' time that we've known this for 4 days and Granny's had her bank account raided in that period, but you could have helped Granny? So once we worked out that it was our job to protect our customers, even when you had this authority figure of the Met on the board call, minutes of it demanding that the board minuted that the Met had advised against it, we were clear what we needed to do. And from that moment on, and Charles couldn't have been a better chair, or founder in that regard, we were really united as a board that it was our job to look after our customers. And as we recovered, we rediscovered the spirit of the business, which was as a challenger business trying to do what's right for people who couldn't afford to be ripped off on their broadband. And that, if I'd known that up front, that when you face one of these attacks, be clear what your job is. And don't expect all of these other entities they can help you, but they haven't got the same objective as you. Only you have got the job of looking after your own customers. And in the end, in a consumer business, if you look after your customers, everything else sorts itself out. And that would have led us, we would have announced earlier, we wouldn't have scared people so much because we'd have said to the Met, we need you, and this would happen now. We'd have said to the Met and the now National Cyber Security Centre, we're going to do a press conference at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, not at 10 o'clock at night. You're going to be beside us. We're going to say we take full responsibility for this, but some criminals have attacked us. This is what we're doing to protect you, and this is how you can help yourself. And that would have been a much better way to handle it.
What a powerful example of the courage required there in that face, as you say, of an authority figure, the police, telling you don't go out there, to actually do what was right by your customers. And I can see absolutely why, actually, unless you've lived that before, that's not an easy place and response to get to.
Oliver, the other thing that's really not easy, and which, if you do have a major cyber attack you have to face, is that when you have a major cyber attack, you immediately start shutting down systems and services in order to contain the attack. It's actually very easy for a board to decide to shut down services. It's really hard to decide it's safe enough to open them up again, because you will have your CTO telling you that there are risks. And as a board, you're thinking, we can't afford a second cyber attack. He said, well, yeah, but we can't afford not to trade. And I can remember the board debates in the sort of 2 to 6 months after the cyber attack and how difficult those discussions were. I remember one board meeting when a non-executive asked my CTO, are we sorted now? Have we mitigated all our cyber risk? And the CTO took a great big deep breath. Yeah, you know what he's going to say, and said no. And he was amazing. A bit of board theatre. He paused. He said no. He took a deep breath. And he watched everyone panic. And then he said, and I'm never going to answer the question in any other way. So what I'm going to tell you is where we know we've got risk, what we're doing to mitigate that risk, and where we are making a conscious decision that we can't mitigate, but we need to be able to trade. And it shifted the whole debate and discussion around the boardroom table. And we were very lucky because we had a CTO who was a board member. The CTO of Thomson Reuters, James Powell, was on our board at the time. So he was able to provide real subject matter expertise. We had Howard Stringer, who had been the CEO of Sony when Sony had a big cyber attack. So he had lived it as well. So I had quite a lot of lived experience around the boardroom table. But it was still, it's really hard as a non-executive director, because comes back to what I said about having that resignation letter in your back pocket. You feel personally culpable when you've lost your customers' data, but you're the non-exec and you're not living it every day. And so inevitably your non-execs can be much more risk averse in that decision-making process. And I was incredibly lucky to have a very experienced board who were able to say, no, we have got to take some risk. And we understand where the management team are coming from. And together it was a very generative problem-solving space to say, okay, what risk are we willing to hold as a board? What risk can we only hold for a month or two? Because we know we've got to put some money behind fixing. And what risk are we not willing to hold at all? And you can't open up that capability until you've solved this problem. And that's a much more mature cyber conversation to be having.
It strikes me that boards are quite split on that, whether to have functional experts on the board, that CTO figure who's taking up a space from someone else. What's your perspective on that? Do you think every board should have that figure, or is it enough for board members just to be aware and to be able to pull in the right expertise through consultants or otherwise as the situation requires?
I don't like having an expert on the board if the board use that as a opportunity to abdicate overall board responsibility for the issue. And that's the same for any expert on the board. That said, in a heavy technology business, having technologists on your board is hugely valuable for a very broad range of reasons. And so the CTO we had as a board member was a very broad contributor on the board, and he wasn't there. I mean, maybe you could say this is a learning. He was not there because of his cyber expertise. He was there because we were a telco with a very large and complex tech stack, looking at how we expanded and developed into adjacent technologies like television and mobile. His lived experience through a technology-based crisis was hugely helpful in that instance. So I guess I'm being very much a politician and sitting on the fence. I think that creating a board is like designing a patchwork quilt. So there should never be any fixed ingredients. And the real art of a chair and a nominations committee is in creating a board that's got that sort of kaleidoscope of different skills and experiences and styles that they can adapt when they're needed. So that's a way of saying, I don't think you should be prescriptively yes or prescriptively no. But a technology business, and most businesses these days are heavy in technology, to have no one on the board that understands technology, that would be a problem for me, regardless of cyber or not.
If you're listening to these conversations and thinking, I'd love someone to guide me through my own board journey, that's exactly what Nurole Plus offers. Personalised advice, expert feedback, and someone in your corner as you build towards your next role. Head to plus.nurole.com to find out more. Now, time is flying by, so we're going to have to go on to the lightning round. But before we do, it'd be remiss of me not to at least just get a sense of your learning from your time at the NHS, where you took on an executive chair role. And as I understand, you didn't actually have a formal board there because things were moving so fast. Obviously, you were reacting to the sort of the COVID crisis at the time. But I'd be really interested to hear how that experience changed the way that you think about boards and the value that they add, and how you addressed, I guess, the missing support and challenge that a board can provide in that situation.
Yes, so May 2020, the Prime Minister asked me to set up what became called NHS Test and Trace. And the task was to go live in 3 weeks. It was being built within the Department of Health and Social Care, so there wasn't a separate corporate entity. There wasn't a separate board to begin with. There wasn't a management team on day one. There were disparate groups of people who were working on bits, and step one was just to form an executive team. And I didn't have a formal board, and there wasn't a formal board really for it until what is now the UK Health Security Agency came into being sort of a year after I started. And so, as you say, I didn't have a formal board. What I worked out instantly was I needed the equivalent of the phone a friend experts who were close enough to what we were doing, but not involved in it on a day-to-day basis to help. So I actually called them. They were sort of surrogate board members for this non-board. David Roberts, who was at the time Deputy Chairman of NHS England, and Laura Wade-Geary, who was Chairman of NHS Digital. I used to speak to Laura at sort of 5:45 in the morning, 2 or 3 days a week that first month, to say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Can you find me someone? They both helped a lot on recruiting. Can you get me a long list of people who could be a CISO? I need the long list in 12 hours, and they need to be able to start in 24 hours. So it was all ridiculously rapid fire, but they were sort of acting as non-execs. David challenged me over the summer of 2020 that I ought to have a board, and I remember sort of violently saying no, because I was at the time trying to wean the Secretary of State off having daily meetings with me and was having weekly meetings with the Prime Minister, and I felt at the time the last thing I needed was another layer of governance. The last thing I needed was more fiduciary or strategic oversight. But if I look back, I don't think I did have the bandwidth and we didn't have the construct to create a board. at the time. But 3 or 4 months into that year, it might have been a good idea to have had an advisory board up and running. And I think probably that was a mistake. And I fell into the chief exec track of seeing the board as another governance layer rather than that generative support. Now, I think, as I say, we got that support in a very informal way through the different projects. But, you look back and think, if you comes back again to having your contingency planning structured so that you don't have to think of everything from scratch, I would love to think that if the government, by the way, I don't think this would happen sadly at the moment, but if the government were thinking of setting up a new national citizen service to launch in a month's time, which is basically what I was being asked to do, in that toolkit of civil contingency planning, having even if it's an informal group of advisors available to the leadership of that who are not part of the political decision making, I think I would say that would be a good thing to do. And I'm mindful I haven't said that's the COVID inquiry, so you've flushed out a new insight that I ought to be sharing with them.
It's one of the reasons, actually, we've developed this offering that we call pop-up boards, and we need a better name for it because the fact that it's got a board in there makes CEOs shiver. Yeah. But it's effectively an on-demand group of, I think one CEO who experienced it said it's like having the Avengers on speed dial, because you get this group on demand to be able to brainstorm with. They have no agenda other than to help you. They're not there to hire and fire you in the way that a board is, and they're all deeply expert on the situation, stage that you're at, and size of organisation you're at. And I'm convinced, it strikes me that there are too many boards that are dysfunctional with super talented people. It can't be coincidence. It must be something about the construct of the board that leads to that, and therefore we need to be thinking about different ways, as you've just alluded to, for how we might bring in that sort of wisdom, those Laura Geary's, into a CEO who needs that support and challenge in a safe space.
Yes, and I think I look back and think, I was in an extraordinarily privileged as well as challenging position, because at the time, if I picked up the phone to anyone and said, I need some help, I'm trying to work out how to do X, Y, and Z, there wasn't a leader in the country who didn't say, what do you need me to do? So I had that enormous phone a friend ability. What I didn't have was the consistency of a informal, formal group that could be convened to do that on a regular basis, and maybe that would have helped. I'm not sure in the first few weeks it would have done. In the first few weeks, there was no time.
All hands to the deck.
And actually, I think if you talk to, one of the reasons I was free to do NHS Test and Trace was the job of the non-exec in the absolute heat of the crisis is to get out of the way of the management team and make sure that the management team are alive and feel supported and are looking after themselves as human beings. The last thing you should be doing as a non-exec in the first 48 hours of a cyber attack is trying to offer helpful advice, other than, have you had some sleep? Are you okay? Do you need a hug?
Dido, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and a quick response if you're ready.
Far away.
Best book every board member should read, and why?
My favourite book at the moment is called Why Nations Fail, because I'm interested in public policy as well as business and the role business plays in creating better societies.
Boardroom behaviour that irritates you most?
I hate form over substance. So I get really cross with people who are wanting to tick the box and protect their backside rather than do what's right for the business.
Most valuable board ritual?
We have a ritual in Miagra, the social enterprise I chair, which is we always have a mission moment at the beginning of the board where we hear the story of one of the farmers that we serve, and it grounds everyone in the mission of the business. So whatever the business is, bringing your board, before you do any actual work, back to the reality of who are the people we are trying to provide a service or a product to.
Back to that mastery, autonomy, purpose that you talked about earlier of the tripartite. Your favourite quote?
I have it sitting on the wall behind me and it's too long to give you. It's the Teddy Roosevelt man in an arena quote, or the woman in the arena as my team produced for me. That fundamentally that you should be on the pitch tackling the problems, not running away from them.
Most significant professional insight?
I wish I had known when I was a lot younger, but I scared the living daylights out of the men that I worked with. And I was so busy feeling insecure, I didn't realise that they were all insecure too. And the more senior you get, actually, the more likely the people around the table are feeling insecure. And your job as the leader is to help them feel safe if they can share their wisdom.
Worst professional advice you've ever received?
Not to go and work for Charles Dunstan.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
I've become so much more excited about the generative work that boards could do than I was when I first began. I wish I'd known that when I first became a board director.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
I had a really difficult board meeting yesterday, and I'm sure we made some mistakes there. I just don't know what they are yet. I think you mustn't be afraid of making mistakes. So rather than sharing my dirty linen, I think you just need to recognise that sometimes the job of the board is to take a decision and then not agonise that you might have got some stuff wrong.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
I am more comfortable in my own skin than I was, and therefore more willing to be me rather than pretend to be someone that the rest of the board might want me to be. And as a result, I'll be a better board member.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
Probably my 3 around purpose. Do stuff that you care about. If you want to be on a board because you care about its purpose and its mission. Be on a board where you're going to learn and grow, and be on a board where you're going to have some sense of agency, where they actually want you to do stuff rather than you're going to be a token on the board.
That has been such an inspiring and energising conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience.
Absolutely my pleasure.
If today's guest has got you thinking about your own board journey, Nurole Plus, our premium level of membership, is there to guide you. With expert support, personalised feedback, and a much wider pool of board opportunities to explore. Listeners get 10% off. Head to plus.nurole.com and use the code ENTER at checkout.